So this is perhaps the trickiest part of the project, and that's getting these extrusions along these wire lines. But let's start off with the easiest part. That's to actually move or create the facade. And I'll just turn a couple of these items on. One of the things I've found was that since we're thickening up our front section to make a strong metal element out of it, it pierces through the facade. So I've added in just a little bit of a geometry translate to bring it away from the facade. So I move it 1.5 feet away from the front of the facade just to keep it from showing through in the renderings. So that's what this geometry translate is. But the heart of the whole building of the front facade, which is done as a mesh, if I turn the preview on here, is to just panelize it. So I know I have 4 divisions, so I panelized it using panel quad. So I'm importing that smooth surface. I'm then dividing it off in 4 dimensions that way and in 30 dimensions across, just to create a sense of smoothing. And there's a few things that happen that are the way it smooths it. Sometimes it generates these really large panels here. But as you continue, I didn't want to go up too high with refining this, just too many panel counts. But there could have been a little better work with the panel quad definition, probably a little more advanced about how we panelize this. Well, with that all said, though, that just gives us a workable division of space. And that translate, if I was to preview that, that's just another, and you can see that facade bounces up. And the only intersections are where we have this kind of a tube failure with the way we make the wire grid system. So that takes care of our front facade, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that off because we're actually not going to see any of this. We don't want any of this visible to us. And I'll go back over here. Well, I'll leave the grids on yet. The next thing we want to do is add the truss pipes, and I'll turn those on so you can see what I'm talking about. We'll go to preview mode for that. And now you see we've added in this, excuse me, let me zoom the truss itself. Now we've added the pipe frame system. And once again, I've got this is not really refined, many pipes in it as is needed for it to not do these kind of intersections within our curving shape. So this is just that the way we're dividing off our grid with our 1D division system is not the final solution. It's really just a way for us to start conceiving this as a truss system visually. So, but let me show you how that's constructed. So we go to the truss pipes. So remember now we made this wire grid, and this is where this wire grid system should be much more refined as far as not having front pipes on it. A whole other way to do this would be to divide this line off by points, divide this line off by an equal number of points, and then relate 2 lists to each other to create these lines between. The problem with that in experimentation is that we can introduce, with this wire grid system, these kind of intermediate connection systems, like this double truss depth, which is kind of fun to do. And that's by just changing this V. Right now it's at 2, but we could easily put 3 or 4, or we could just go down to 1 and change its complexity. So I'm using this tool just because of that kind of fun aspect of the experimentation. So back to the idea of then what we do with that. So we take the lines out of the structural grid that we've created, and we first of all have to create a relationship for how we want to extrude a profile, which is ultimately what's going on here. We're doing solid by sweep. So we take a circular profile and we move it all along the path, the line that's created, those lines. But the critical element here is a circle by plane radius needs this idea of a plane. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this, and you'll see all of the planes pop up that define that. And I'll just kind of zoom in here a little bit. So now each one of these elements has a plane that defines which way it wants to orient the circular shape. And that's really the crux of making this idea of circle by plane radius. And the radius is really quite small. It's 0.3. That means it would be about 6 of 12, about 6 inches in diameter. So that takes care of our truss pipes. And then our other two elements are the front and rear rails. And we really do those similarly. The front rail, if I do, this one's airing out, and I don't know if that, there are a couple of these that aren't actually appearing, and that I have the amplitude set up too high. Some minor adjustments in a couple of these settings will make this appear, not appear. It seems like I last left off that it wasn't. So you can see what happens when I turn this on. I have one of the forms that's not appearing correctly. So I would, to deal with that, I would probably either change the amplitude a little bit or just make some minor adjustment, maybe make the truss depth a little different, and that will usually make this thing function properly. Anyway, let's talk about what the front curved rail is. Once again, we establish a plane. So if I was to turn this on, and I really need to turn off the other ones here for a minute. Let's turn this off. Oops, I wanted to turn off the plane. So what we're looking at now is we just are indicating a plane at the very beginning of the curves. So that's a plane that then gets generated all along that sweep, and we're going to move a rectangle, which in this case is a rectangle by width and length. Let me change my hand back to a pointer. So we have a 1 foot by 1 foot piece of rectangular tube that we're bending along here, moving along the plane. That gives us our shape. So we fed our curve in here. So we have what's basically a NURBS curve, a plane defining the NURBS curve, and the NURBS curve down here, excuse me. So we have a plane and a profile relationship to that line, and fed in here, and then the path, which is the other curve, and that gives us our form. And it's really just exactly the same thing that's going to happen with the back side, except this time the curve is really just a straight line. And I'll turn that on so you can see that get highlighted. So we have a back rail and a front rail. This one's aired out currently. And the next thing we're going to do is get that out to Revit.